Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about something that I think is on a lot of people's minds these days. Narcissism.
Mm.
Whether you're dealing with someone difficult in your life or just fascinated by the concept, I think we all know a narcissist or two. So we're going to break it all down together. Our guide for this is Thomas Erikson's book, Surrounded by Narcissists. I'm excited to jump into some of the fascinating insights that he offers.
Yeah, it's a topic that I think is really relevant now more than ever. We hear that word narcissist and we often just think of someone who's vain, like really obsessed with themselves. But it actually goes so much deeper than that. Narcissism is a personality disorder that can have really serious consequences, not just for the narcissist, but for everyone around them.
Okay, so more than just someone who can't stop looking in the mirror.
Yeah, exactly. Narcissistic personality disorder is actually characterized by a really profound lack of empathy. So narcissists really struggle to understand and share the feelings of other people. And Erikson suggests that this might stem from early childhood experiences, where maybe their own emotional needs weren't really met. So they develop this pattern of seeking validation and attention from external sources.
Oh, wow, that makes a lot of sense. So it's like they're constantly trying to fill this void inside themselves. But how does that actually play out in their everyday interactions?
Well, think about it this way. Have you ever worked with someone who just seems to thrive on putting other people down? Or that friend who can only talk about themselves? Narcissists have this constant need for attention, this constant need for validation. And that, combined with a lack of empathy, can create some really toxic dynamics. And Erikson uses this term, love bombing, to describe how narcissists often operate in the early stages of a relationship.
Love bombing. That actually sounds kind of nice.
Yeah, it can seem that way at first. It's all about showering their target with affection. They give compliments. They make these grand gestures. It's almost like they're trying to create this illusion of being like the perfect partner. They're really experts at mirroring your desires and vulnerabilities. But it's all a strategy. It's a strategy to win you over and secure what they want from the relationship.
So it's not actually genuine.
Not really. Once they feel like they've kind of won you over, the mask starts to slip. You start to see that empathy deficit become more and more apparent. And the focus shifts almost entirely to their own needs and desires.
Yeah, that's when things can really get messy, right? Like in romantic relationships, for example.
Oh, absolutely. Erikson really paints a vivid picture of how destructive this can be. Imagine you have a partner who constantly criticizes you, belittles your accomplishments, undermines your self-esteem. It's a pattern of emotional abuse. And over time, it can have a devastating impact.
That's heavy stuff. It's really heartbreaking to think about people who are trapped in those situations. But before we go down that road, I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, the color system. Erikson uses this as a tool to understand personality types, right? I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating system. He uses 4 colors, red, yellow, green, and blue, to represent different personality traits. And it's not about putting people in boxes. It's really about understanding your own strengths and weaknesses, as well as the strengths and weaknesses of the people around you. This can be incredibly helpful in navigating interactions with all kinds of people, not just narcissists.
Okay, so how does this color system actually work? Can you break it down for us a little?
Sure. Think of it as a quick way to kind of grasp the core motivations and behaviors of different personality types. So reds, for example. Reds are driven. They're assertive. They really love control. They might be drawn to leadership roles and really thrive in competitive environments.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. What about the other colors?
So yellows. Yellows are all about social connection, making people happy. They're the life of the party. Optimistic, and they love to be surrounded by people. Then you have greens. Greens value harmony and stability. They're patient, empathetic, great listeners. And then finally you have the blues. Blues are all about precision and accuracy. They're analytical, detail-oriented, and they love to follow rules and procedures.
I'm already starting to see how this could be useful. Like if I know that I'm a red personality, I might be more susceptible to a narcissist's attempts to trigger my anger or need for control.
Exactly. And if you're a yellow, you might be particularly vulnerable to narcissists using isolation or rejection as like a manipulation tactic.
Wow, that's really insightful. So knowing your own dominant color and understanding the colors of the people around you can help you anticipate potential challenges and navigate those interactions more effectively.
That's the idea. It's about using this knowledge as a tool for self-awareness and personal growth.
Okay, so let's say I've figured out my color and I realize I'm dealing with a narcissist in my life. What are some practical strategies I can use to protect myself? Does Erikson offer any advice on that front?
He definitely does. One of the most powerful techniques he suggests is simply calling out the manipulative behavior, like directly confronting them.
Exactly. But the key is to do it calmly and assertively. You can say something like, I feel like you're trying to manipulate me right now. Now, don't expect them to just admit it and apologize. They might get defensive or try to turn it around on you. But by simply acknowledging the manipulation, you're shining a light on their tactics and making it harder for them to operate in the shadows.
Right, you're taking away their power.
It's about disrupting their game. But what if calling them out just feels too confrontational? Are there other ways to kind of throw them off balance?
There's this other technique Erikson talks about that I find really interesting. He calls it the power of the pause. And it's basically about disengaging from the conversation strategically.
Disengage, you mean like just walking away?
Well, it can be that simple sometimes. But it's more about putting a stop to the interaction on your terms. Like, if you're on the phone, you can say something like, oh, someone's at the door, I have to go. Or, my battery's dying, I'll call you back later. If you're in person, you can excuse yourself to the bathroom. Or pretend to get an important call. Or you can just say, I need some time to think about that, I'll get back to you. The key is to disrupt their momentum, create some distance.
So you're refusing to play their game. I can see how that would be especially effective for dealing with those red or yellow personality types. You know, the ones who thrive on immediate reactions and that emotional intensity.
Exactly. You're taking the wind out of their sails. And that pause can give you a chance to kind of step back, assess the situation more objectively. You can ask yourself, what's really going on here? What are their motives? And how do I want to respond?
You're taking back control of the interaction rather than letting them dictate the terms. I like that. But let's say you've tried these techniques and the narcissist in your life is still pushing your buttons. What then? Is there a point where you just have to cut them off completely?
Yeah, it can definitely come to that. Sometimes that's the healthiest decision you can make. But before we talk about walking away, let's talk about setting boundaries.
Boundaries. That seems crucial in any relationship, but especially when dealing with someone who might be manipulative or disrespectful.
Absolutely. Setting boundaries is about defining what you will and will not accept in your interactions with someone. It's about protecting your own well-being, making sure your needs are being met.
So how do you actually set boundaries with a narcissist? That seems like it would be incredibly challenging.
It can be, but it's not impossible. The first step is to identify the specific behaviors that you're no longer going to tolerate. Maybe it's constant criticism. Maybe it's gaslighting. Maybe it's emotional manipulation. Whatever it is, you need to be clear in your own mind about what those boundaries are.
Okay, so you have your boundaries defined. Now what? How do you actually communicate them effectively?
Well, this is where the color system can actually be helpful again. Understanding the other person's dominant color can give you some insights into how they might respond. So if you're dealing with a red, for example, you might need to be more direct and assertive in your communication. With a yellow, you might need to appeal to their need for connection and belonging.
So you're tailoring your approach to their personality type. But what about the actual words you use? Like, are there good phrases to use when setting boundaries?
Yeah, Erikson offers some really useful examples in the book. Instead of saying, you're always putting me down, you could say, I feel hurt and disrespected when you criticize me. Or instead of saying, you never listen to me, you could say, I need you to hear what I'm saying and acknowledge my feelings.
So you're shifting the focus from blaming them to expressing your own needs and feelings, and that seems like a much more effective approach.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of your experience, asserting your right to be treated with respect.
But what if they just ignore your boundaries? Or what if they try to push back? What then?
That's where consequences come in. You need to be prepared to follow through with actions that protect your well-being. That might mean disengaging from the conversation, taking some space, or even ending the relationship altogether.
Yeah, that's a tough call. But sometimes it's necessary, right? Like, you can't keep sacrificing your own happiness and well-being for someone who's just unwilling to respect your boundaries.
Exactly. Remember, you're not responsible for fixing the narcissist. Your responsibility is to take care of yourself.
This all makes so much sense on an individual level.
Yeah.
But it also makes me think about the bigger picture. Is this something we're seeing more of in society as a whole? Is narcissism actually on the rise?
That's a really interesting question, and Erikson cites some research suggesting that it is. For example, the book The Narcissism Epidemic by psychologists Twenge and Campbell, they argue that we're seeing a significant increase in narcissistic behaviors and attitudes, particularly in Western cultures.
So it's not just my imagination. It really does feel like we're surrounded by more self-centeredness and a lack of empathy these days. But why is this happening? What's fueling this trend?
Well, there are a lot of theories out there. Some researchers point to social media, that constant pressure to present a perfect image online, the validation seeking, the obsession with likes and followers. It can all feed into a more narcissistic mindset.
Social media definitely seems like a breeding ground for self-promotion and just attention grabbing in general. But is there anything else contributing to this?
Well, Erikson also points to the self-help industry, which, while often well-intentioned, can sometimes inadvertently promote narcissistic tendencies.
How so? I would think self-help would be about, well, helping yourself and becoming a better person.
It often is. But the focus on individual desires and achievement, without a corresponding emphasis on empathy and social responsibility, can kind of create this cultural climate where people are encouraged to prioritize their own needs above all else.
It's about finding that balance right between self-improvement and consideration for others. But Erikson takes this a step further. He talks about something called collective narcissism. It's kind of a scary thought.
It is a bit unsettling. Collective narcissism is basically when entire groups start to exhibit narcissistic traits. They demand like unquestioning loyalty and admiration for their group, and they can be incredibly hostile towards anyone who doesn't share their views.
That sounds a lot like what we're seeing in politics these days, with the extreme polarization and the demonization of the other side.
Exactly. And it's not just limited to politics. It can manifest in religious groups, social movements, even fandoms, any group that fosters that us versus them mentality and that sense of superiority can become a breeding ground for collective narcissism.
Wow, that's really eye-opening. So we've got individual narcissists, and now we have to worry about entire groups behaving narcissistically. It kind of feels like we're drowning in a sea of self-centeredness.
It can definitely feel that way sometimes. But remember, even in a world that feels increasingly narcissistic, we have a choice. We can choose to act with empathy, compassion, integrity. We can choose to set boundaries and protect ourselves from toxic influences. And we can choose to engage in constructive dialogue and bridge those divides that separate us.
That's a really empowering message. We're not powerless in the face of this trend. We can make conscious choices that contribute to a more humane and compassionate world.
Exactly. And I think that's what Erikson is ultimately trying to convey in his book. He's not just trying to diagnose the problem. He's offering tools and strategies to help us navigate it and create positive change.
That's what I love about these deep dives. It's not just about understanding a concept intellectually. It's about figuring out how to actually apply that knowledge to our own lives.
Yeah.
And make a difference. So what practical advice does Erikson offer for navigating this increasingly narcissistic world? How can we protect ourselves and maintain our sanity?
Well, a lot of the same strategies we discussed for dealing with individual narcissists apply on a societal level as well.
So things like setting boundaries and calling out manipulative behavior and taking breaks from social media.
Exactly. It's about being mindful of the information we consume, the groups that we associate with, and just the energy that we allow into our lives.
And remembering that we always have a choice. We can choose to engage or disengage. We can choose to speak up or walk away. We can choose to feed the negativity or focus on fostering positive change.
Yeah, it all comes back to that self-awareness and a commitment to living in alignment with our values.
This has been such an insightful conversation. I feel like I'm starting to see the world through a whole new lens.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I want to touch on one more thing. We've talked a lot about the negative aspects of narcissism, but I'm wondering if there's anything we can actually learn from these individuals.
That's an interesting question, and I think the answer is yes. There are a few things we can kind of glean from their playbook, as long as we're careful to avoid those harmful aspects.
Like what?
Well, narcissists tend to be very confident. They're assertive, which can be valuable qualities in certain situations. They're also often very skilled at self-promotion and networking, which can be helpful in professional settings.
So it's about taking those positive traits and applying them in a healthy and ethical way.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between healthy self-confidence and genuine empathy for others. It's not about putting ourselves above everyone else, but recognizing our own worth and advocating for our needs in a respectful way.
This has been such an illuminating discussion, and I feel like we've only scratched the surface of this fascinating and complex topic.
There's always more to explore, and I would really encourage our listeners to continue learning about narcissism, to protect themselves and to contribute to a more compassionate and understanding world.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into narcissism. I hope everyone listening found this conversation as helpful and thought-provoking as I did. And remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about narcissism, the better equipped we are to navigate those complex dynamics. and create healthier relationships and a more compassionate world. Until next time.